Okay, let's do this. Basically, so today we are doing a manga club video live. Manga club is basically exactly what it sounds like. It is a series where I just read manga that I want to read, and then I come here and record a video where I discuss it in little chunks as I make my way through it. And up until this point, I have recorded all of them and just edited them and put them on YouTube, but I had the idea of actually doing them live because of a few reasons, actually. It's easier for me, yes, but it also allows for direct engagement. The One Piece video, especially the first One Piece video, got a lot of attention compared to what my channel usually does, and so for that reason I was like, oh well, clearly this is something that people are interested in and are willing to engage in based on the the comments that I was getting and stuff. So in my mind it's like, okay, well, why not allow those discussions to happen real time? So what we're actually doing is talking about One Piece. We are doing a One Piece manga club. I did the first one a while back, and I talked about, I believe it was the first 3 volumes that I talked about. And you may notice that this title doesn't have any volume numbers in it, and that's because I actually decided to change slightly the way that I'm doing the One Piece videos. I'm no longer going to be basing it on the volumes themselves, but instead the arcs. Last time we did this, I did volumes 1 through 3, and what I got through was, I believe, the first arc, which was Romance Dawn, and then the second arc, which was Orange Town, and then I had just pretty much started the third arc, which is called Syrup Village, which is what we're doing now, and that is chapters 22 through 41. So obviously, big spoiler warning for chapters 22 through 41 of One Piece. I have all my notes in front of me. I'm just going to go through them, and I'm not really going to completely recap every little thing that happened, because if you're watching this, I'm assuming that you've read this far in. The first thing that I have is about the kind of, I guess I would call it the pre-arc to this arc, because this arc, it doesn't really begin when it begins. It feels like there's almost a filler kind of thing in between the last stuff and the current stuff, and not filler necessarily in a bad way, but it definitely feels like there is a build up before we actually get where we're going, and that is the whole deserted island thing with that weird treasure chest guy. I think his name is Gaimon, and it's weird. That whole little section was odd, and I wasn't really sure where it was going the whole time. And then the answer was that it didn't really go anywhere. It was just a fun little adventure, which I think I mentioned last time that I like that this series does that, and that is true. I do hope that that continues to be the case, where they're not afraid to just go somewhere random and have a fun little episodic adventure. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and that was a particularly goofy and fun one to read. So I like it. I like that little side adventure that happened. But obviously the real meat of this arc is in meeting and getting introduced to Usopp, and him becoming a member of Luffy's crew. And that is the majority of the time spent in this arc, because, you know, shortly after we do all of the treasure chest island stuff, we're introduced to Usopp, we're introduced to Kaya, the sick girl that he visits, and Clawhador, Kaya's butler, who, of course, we learn is actually named, what is it, Captain Kuro of the Black Cat Pirates. And it's this entire story of Usopp being basically infamous in his town for being kind of a guy who just cries wolf all the time. And the way that comes back to bite him, and the way that the crew of Luffy, Nami, and Zoro come to cross paths with that, and it all gets jumbled up, and eventually they're all fighting together, and it all ends up with that huge confrontation with Kuro and his crew. So I'm just gonna go through some of my notes, I guess just from top to bottom, and just see what I got here, because I have been keeping actual notes the entire time I've been reading. Every chapter I have at least one, or maybe some chapters I don't have some, but we meet Usopp and learn about his visits to Kaya. And oddly, although most of the town finds him quite annoying and just kind of a nuisance, she tends to really like his lies and sees them as these really fun stories. And I think that introduction to the relationship between Kaya and Usopp really humanizes him and like makes him sympathetic pretty quickly, because he seems like kind of just a village fool kind of character, but it makes it very obvious that he does have like an actual big heart, and he is a kind person. Even though he likes to cause mischief, he's not malicious. He wants to keep this girl company, and he's clearly like, it seems like he's a good person right from the get-go, and I appreciate that. Someone we also learn about is Yasopp, Usopp's father, and what's interesting about him is that he's an old member of Shank's crew. So that is very interesting, because Yasopp, I believe, went missing, or maybe it didn't even go missing, but like he went off for a voyage like a long time ago and never came back. And Shanks has also not come back. And so there is part of me that wonders, will we meet one when we meet the other? Are they both gone? Will we meet people who knew either of them? There are so many mysteries with that crew specifically. It feels like all of them just dropped off the face of the earth, and it leads me to wonder just like, what happened to them? Where are they? It could very easily be that they just all wound up in some giant battle, or they got sucked into some vortex in the sea and they all just died. But I want to believe it's more than that. I want to believe there's a much more complex narrative going on there, being that they are building up so much mystery about where that crew is. So that's something that continues to be quite intriguing as I read, and knowing the length of this, I don't think I'm going to get an answer for a long time, but I hope that I do. I really hope that I do. Yeah, so we learn that Klahadore is named Kuro when Luffy and Usopp catch him talking to a hypnotist. The hypnotist is Django, which we also learn a little bit later. And Django and Kuro are kind of partners in crime. They have the Black Cat pirate crew, and they have their plan to assassinate Kaya and take over, her estate, and essentially just take over the entire village and have as much money as they want. And they catch these two talking about it and obviously try to do something, and that's kind of what causes this entire arc's main set of conflicts to fall into place, because they clash here. Luffy is put to sleep, which is, that whole thing is hilarious. I think when he has to be woken up and Nami decides to do that by literally just like kicking him in the face and he's just like irritated by it. It was incredible. There are definitely a lot of moments like that in this manga that are just delightful, like just really lighthearted, and like Oda uses Luffy's kind of superhuman stretchiness and like resilience to the best comedic effect that he can a lot of the time, and I like that because it's not just specifically for combat. It's also like, it would be funny if this kid had this like stupidly tough stretchy body. Like, yeah, you just kick him in the face, and to him it's basically just like shaking him to wake him up. Like, it's great. Usopp tries to warn the villagers, but they don't believe him because he's literally the village liar. He lies all the time about pirates coming, and why would they believe him now? So he decides he just wants to kind of defeat them on his own, especially because even Kaya doesn't believe him. Kaya is someone who has always enjoyed his company, but kind of feels he went too far this time, because he's saying that pirates are coming and that Klahadore is one of them, Kaya's butler, and I think she probably felt pretty betrayed, because she was one of the only people who felt the good side of Usopp's shenanigans, and for him to, seemingly to her, take it further than he had before was probably a slap in the face, which is, exactly what she did to him. But of course Luffy helps with the fight. Luffy, Zoro, and Nami, and this is probably the best we've seen them like working together yet. Like, all three of them in tandem, and all four of them, if we're going to count Usopp now, all four of them in tandem do their own part in the fight. And I really, like, as a shonen, I enjoy that everybody gets to do something. Everybody gets to do something. There is way too common of a trend in shonen where there is the character that is going to fight, and then the rest of them kind of just line up on the sidelines and become an audience, and they'll like provide commentary for whatever's happening. That is not happening here. Every one of these characters is doing something to the best of their abilities, and it is great. it keeps it like it keeps the action dynamic the entire time, because there's all these moving parts and everybody is trying to accomplish their goals and also trying to understand what the others are trying to do to accomplish their goals and helping each other and all this stuff. It is awesome. The teamwork is so fun to witness happen. I have the note about Luffy when he was told to go north, and he just went whichever way seemed cold to him, because the north would be the coldest. Such an idiot. Yeah, he's such an idiot. Honestly, the whole crew has moments where they're idiots, and I love them for it. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I have that there was like a thing with, I guess, Nami and some caltrops and Zoro and some oil. I think they were like slipping all over it, and it was just funny. It was just great. I love when the crew are they're just idiots. They're just lovable idiots sometimes. But once they do get themselves together a little bit, they become a lot more threatening as a team and as a force to be reckoned with. And something in this set of chapters that I noticed is that like Luffy is way stronger than I realized. Like, yeah, he has the gum powers, but dude, he like when he tore apart the entire like front of the ship to use it as a weapon, like, what? He has like superhuman strength. He is like insanely strong. And then later in the chat, I mean, like I said, Nami kicks him in the face to wake him up, barely does anything to him. Later in the arc, Django throws one of his weapons directly at his head. The blade like goes into his head, and he's just fine after that. He's just fine. Luffy is insanely strong, and I don't know. I think at the beginning, or not at the beginning, I think in the first video I made about One Piece, I mentioned something about like, oh, how is Luffy ever going to face a challenge? You know, if he's basically made of gum and he's like strong and he's this insanely like immovable object basically. How is he going to ever face anything that could bring him like close to death? And this just kind of strengthened that question for me, because I mean, to be completely fair, there is a moment where he passes out from blood loss, and that was interesting because that was the first time that we see him actually vulnerable at all. But even then, he's able to recover pretty quickly, and I definitely feel that any other character who suffered those kind of injuries would have been dead. And I don't know, all I can really hope for is that the danger continues to ramp up like it has, because at first it seemed like nothing. Now it's like, okay, this is dangerous for Luffy, I guess, but it's not deadly. It is surely not deadly. And so the only way that I could see him coming into contact with like actual like life or death challenges is if this steady acceleration of the amount of danger continues on the path that it is. There was a Q&A with Oda in between some of the chapters, and it said he had an answer to a question where he said, the reason Luffy doesn't kill is this: in his era, men live by their beliefs and risk their lives to defend them. Luffy shatters the beliefs of his enemies by defeating them. For them to suffer defeat and have their beliefs destroyed is as bad as death. Killing their bodies is besides the point. I thought it was a very good way of putting it. And it is, I think that's a good main character to have, that is so steadfast in his good-natured attitude that it is, that in itself is like a weapon against these like nasty pirates. just Luffy being himself is enough to shatter their entire worldviews. And I don't know, I like that Oda established and acknowledged that, because that means there's probably going to be more of that as we continue, which is a cool way of going about it, I think. Yeah, we were introduced to the Meow Band brothers in this set of chapters. They're definitely not the focus, that's for sure. They're side bosses, they're optional bosses. they have pretty common loot drops, I would reckon. But they are still worth mentioning. Siam and Butchie, absolutely ridiculous looking, like the most ridiculous looking like cartoon characters I've ever seen. I wrote down, finally someone worthy of the name the Black Cats, because they just look like furries. They're just the worst. They look so stupid, and I kind of love it, but oh my god. I want to know, like, is Butchie's name wordplay for something? Because Siam is, Siamese cat, but is Butchie, is there a cat that has a name similar to that? Because I couldn't think of it myself. Same with Meowban. So yeah, Zoro does have a full-on fight with Siam and Butchie, and it's mainly just him, because there's the whole scene where he sabotages like any attempt to help him, because he doesn't want them to get hurt. He knows that, like, Usopp, for example, is just going to get hurt if he tries to intervene. And I think this was really good characterization for Zoro. He seems like, once you get on his good side, once he thinks that you are a person worth protecting and worth fighting for, it seems he is extremely loyal. Especially because he did this for Usopp, who he just met recently. You know, he didn't know Usopp that well, but it seems once he has made a judgment on someone, it's like, okay, I will do everything I can to make sure you are not hurt. And that is super honorable. I think that is great. Zoro is a wonderful character. Like, I genuinely love, like, everything about Zoro. He's great. It's proving the crew's ability to hold their own, at the very least, without Luffy's, like, super OP, stretch crazy, Superman powers. They definitely help. They certainly help. But the rest of the crew is able to, they're not pushovers. Like, they can hold their own. They can figure stuff out on their own, and I like that. I like that this little section where Luffy is asleep kind of showed that, like, they're capable. Speaking of capable, I do want to bring direct attention to Usopp's role later on, where he is basically beaten to the brink of, like, passing out. Like, he is on the floor, he can't stand up, he can do barely anything. And I need to call specific attention to this, because Usopp in this moment could have become a kind of comic relief character who is, it's the useless member who you can't do anything, and isn't it funny, he's just, like, on the ground being useless, and, like, watching everybody, and then like at the end it could have been like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't do anything well, like everybody else contributed. And like, I feel like that's kind of a trope sometimes, and fortunately this is avoided and gave me a lot more respect for Usopp, because it didn't matter what was happening. He did everything that he could possibly do to help out. He never let the others just handle it on their own. He always he wanted to be a part of the solution, whether it was when he was telling Kaya and the kids to run away and, you know, kind of thinking of ways to convince them to do that, using his slingshot from the ground. Even if he can't actually move, he can use his slingshot, and he does, and he's very effective with it. He basically blows Django's face off with his slingshot, and so yeah, I just felt like this was pretty notable, is that Oda doesn't let Usopp become the useless, just kind of like, there is a certain kind of character who becomes unlikable because they're so just like, oh my god, like, do something, do anything, earn your place on this team. And Usopp does earn his place on this team. He doesn't just sit around, and that's awesome, because if he could do all that when he's basically immobile, what can he do when he's not, right? Like, Usopp is cool. I like Usopp. I'm going to go through the rest of this arc real quick, and then I am going to talk a little bit more about my thoughts on Usopp. So, first of all, he pulled the pussyfoot maneuver. Perfect line. I don't think I could come up with a better line in my entire life. That's all. Kuro. Kuro is an interesting villain. He is certainly intimidating, and there is the moment where Kaya is helping out. Kaya also does quite a lot. For just being like a side character. She's very active and does her part as well to help out again in basically any way she can, which is great. But there is that moment where Kuro basically just like completely manipulates her, and like, you know, he reminds her of like all that time they spent together, and like how that led up to now, and just psychologically like completely breaks her down. And that is a omen of how cold Captain Kuro is, because we see throughout the entire rest of it his complete lack of any kind of like empathy, any kind of regard for others at all. The fact that he wants to kill the entire village, he does not care. He wants to kill Kaya. He does not feel anything for her after spending this much time with her. He doesn't react to like anything. He just always seems so arrogant. That is the word. He's an extremely arrogant character who thinks he is like the best. He is there's the whole moment where he's like breaking down about how he cannot have his plan defeated when Luffy is about to beat him, and he is just he is so frustrated. How could somebody ruin my plan? How could this be happening? This can't be happening. He is essentially there are two Light Yagamis. There is Light Yagami in the first half of Death Note, and there is Light Yagami in the second half of Death Note. And Kuro is Light Yagami in the second half of Death Note. he is a somewhat mastermind who has become so arrogant and so full of his own abilities that he does not think it is possible for him to fail. He does not see a world in which he is not at the top and everybody else isn't simply subservient to his desires. And that is his downfall. You know, he is he's extremely overconfident, and it definitely, I think, aided in his defeat in this battle. But despite that, he is still scary. Like, he is still really good. It's not like he's arrogant for no reason. He has a reason. He is a strong villain. He kills like his entire crew almost. And that was a pretty scary scene. Like, it was very harrowing to just watch all of these crew members just go down one by one and just slashed open, and Kuro just cold, just as he always was. Just you know, they were just functional. They were nothing. They were pawns to my game, and that's it. That's all they were. And yeah, that was effective. That was very effective. And it was also an effective moment of characterization for Luffy, because he looks traumatized by what he's seeing when he watches Kuro killing his men. He seems maybe just about the angriest I've seen him the entire way so far, because he is shouting about like how don't you care about your own men? And that is a perfect representation of Luffy being the polar opposite of Kuro, where he is never at the top. He never sees himself at the top of anything. He sees everybody as equally important and, you know, valuable. And he feels it is the moral right thing to do to care for people. And so to see someone so blatantly doing the opposite of that, and so carelessly, just without any hesitation at all, it clearly gets so under Luffy's skin in a way that maybe he doesn't even, like, he can't even fully compartmentalize. It just, the shot of Luffy's face reacting to what is happening is a standout one, because in that one shot, it's just, there is something in Luffy's eyes that just, he can't believe what he's seeing in front of him. So he is very intimidating. He is very scary, and he's a good challenge. I think he's a little bit less interesting than Buggy and Buggy's crew. Not in terms of character, not in terms of, just in terms of kind of the fun of reading it. I think Buggy is an extremely fun villain and had a fun design, and everything about him was just fun to learn about. I think Kuro is a bit more in the camp of what you would expect a big bad villain to be, a sort of like, I am the best and I am a villain and I am going to kill everyone and take over and be rich. And, you know, he's a bit more by the numbers, not so much that it feels generic, I don't think. But I do definitely have to say, I think I prefer the villains that are like Buggy, that are a little bit more out there, a little bit more cartoony. Even in the way that I put here. Now this is a nitpick, but I'm not a huge fan of characters shouting move names while they do them. I just don't love it. I know it's like a classic shonen thing, but that might be why I don't love it, because it's just like, it's such a trope at this point. It's like, I'm shouting my move name, and like, it's very 90s shonen, which makes sense for a 90s shonen. But I don't know, sometimes it just takes me out of it a little bit. It's just a little, especially when it is such a menacing villain like Kuro, and they're just running around shouting, special moves. I don't know. I think that fit much better in the fight with Buggy, because Buggy was so cartoony and over the top that it was like, yes, these guys are going to be shouting special moves at each other. They're like weirdo fighting game characters. But Kuro and the whole situation with him felt a little bit more grim. So when they're like, oh, gum missile and all this stuff, when they're like when they're doing all the moves, it's just, I don't know, it feels a little silly, and not really silly in the way that the entire rest of it feels silly. It feels a little like out of place silly, but I think that might just be me. Like, that's kind of a nitpick. One thing that I like on the other end, speaking of Buggy, is the pre-chapter art pieces with Buggy and his crew after the battle. Phenomenal. Great. I think my favorite one is the one where Buggy is trying to like capture a bird, and he like makes like a hole in the ground and tries to like camouflage it, but you can just see the bird so clearly, just sees what's going on. Buggy is like thinking about like, like it's gonna fall in the hole, and the bird's just like, I see what you're doing. It's great. Those were hilarious. Those were excellent little interludes in between the chapters. I had a lot of fun with those. Yeah. The only other thing is that the switching between the fight with Django and the fight with Kuro, it really did keep the tension and the action pretty high. It made it exciting. I liked it. I think it was great how we just kept seeing different perspectives going on, and it kind of never stopped. We just kept seeing different perspectives, and the pacing felt super, super fast once it got to that latter part of the arc. Basically, as soon as the Miaoban brothers were starting to be taken care of and Django and Kuro became the focus, it went by at a lightning pace. So at the end of this arc is when Usopp actually joins the crew, and it was a pretty funny moment because he thinks he's going out to sea alone, and Zoro's just like, what are you doing, man? Just get on the ship, just get up here. It's very nice. It's kind of heartwarming to see him so lovingly accepted onto the crew like this. It makes me very curious, very interested to see what kind of role he can play for this crew. I think each person has kind of developed their niche role, and I would love to see where he fits. And while I'm talking about Usopp, I'll go a little bit more in depth into my thoughts on Usopp, which I like him. I like him so far. I already mentioned that, he could have been just a blundering type of useless character, but he does things. He does useful things, and I respect him for it. I think his relationship with Kaya was really sweet, and I think his story with his father and his mother that hit when we learn about his father going away, his mother being sick, and he essentially just hoped every day that he would come back with some miracle cure to save his mother, but that never happened. And once we learned about that, it made everything with Kaya feel that much more personal to him. The similarities between hoping his father would come back from sea, and even to this day continuing to say that pirates are coming. It was all very emotionally resonant, and it was good. That was good. When he was leaving as well, his flashbacks with the kids And honestly, his relationship with the kids in general is another thing that is very heartwarming, very just... I like Usopp. I think Usopp he seems like such a genuinely kind person. Even if he is a bit mischievous, he's a bit off kilter sometimes, he seems so kind. When he was talking to the kids near the end, he disbanded the pirate crew, and he was talking to them about what they wanted to do when they grew up. There's no way we don't eventually check back in with this island and its inhabitants, and I want to know, like, I feel like I need updates. I need to know, like, what do these kids eventually get up to? What does Kaya eventually get up to? Kaya, near the end, mentioned she wanted to be a doctor. I do genuinely want to see how these characters fare after this whole thing is over, and how Usopp will hopefully eventually reunite with them. So overall, Usopp is great. Usopp is a good character so far. He hasn't had a whole lot of time to fall into place, but the time that he has had, I think, has been extremely well utilized. Some other closing thoughts. There was a pre-chapter sketch at one point of a long-necked dragon, it said, and it made me realize we've been dealing with mostly humans. But I remember seeing the sea monster like long ago, near the beginning of the entire story. That gets me interested, because there's no way there aren't just a huge menagerie of weird creatures out on the sea. I want to see what we're going to run into when they actually get out there, and once they get to the Grand Line, what kinds of like weird sea creatures are they going to see? I think it could be really fun. I think a larger ship in general should make for a more interesting time when they're out at sea. It's going to be a much better and more varied setting to deal with when they're sailing, which is great, because this is a series that is about sailing on the ocean and adventuring, and so a larger ship I am looking forward to. I think it's gonna be fun. Another thing is, I'm noticing there's a developing pattern of, like, the crew is drawn towards an island, a little like standalone episodic adventure happens on an island, it kind of feeds into the overarching narrative, and then they leave that island, and then they get drawn to another island. And it seems like that is a very deliberate way of segmenting the story. It means that you can have this overarching adventure narrative, but still allow it to get episodic when it wants to, and you can have these little individual stories that have their own spotlight, but they can still kind of feed into what the overall goal of the story is. And I like that. I like that a lot. It's nice that this story has room for serialized arcs as well as just individual little stories. I like it. I like it a lot. I hope it continues. I look forward to reading more of it. I actually really look forward to reading more of it. I'm going to probably kind of binge the next arc as soon as I can, because I'm gonna be honest, this last one made me get really into it. I think it's getting really good, especially now that they have a big ship, they have another member. Like, things are heating up, things are getting good. We're getting up there. We're gonna be past 50 chapters in this next arc, which in a series that is this massive and this spanning, I will take any little, mark of progress that I can get. So, let's go. That being said, that's gonna do it, I think, for this episode of Manga Club. First new live episode of Manga Club. Woo! I hope you enjoyed the format. If you do want to actually join me while I'm making these, I'm gonna be streaming these from now on, and I would heavily encourage you to come in here and tell me what you think. I want to have conversations. I want to have fun conversations about this story and all stories. So like I said, if you're interested in that, you know, consider dropping by. I want to thank you for tuning in if you did. I will hopefully see all of you next time I do this. I'll talk to you soon, and I'll see you later.